So this evening, we're focusing on energy poverty and a just transition. The World Economic Forum defines energy poverty as a lack of adequate, affordable, reliable, quality, safe, and environmentally sound energy services to support development. The three most important factors influencing energy poverty include income, energy prices, and energy efficiency of the home. It's estimated that 1.3 to 2.6 billion people on the planet experience energy poverty, and the number of people in energy poverty in the EU is between 50 and 125 million. So, how does this relate to climate action? How does this relate to a just transition? So, the Climate Justice Alliance describes a just transition as a principle, a process, and a practice. A just transition describes both where we're going and how we get there. So as we transition from an extractive economy to a regenerative and sustainable economy, we must ensure that these societal, political, and economic changes are made holistically and inclusively. The transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources must allow energy supply to become just and equitable. So tonight we want to focus on getting a more in-depth understanding of energy poverty and consider a just transition in energy poverty from a variety of perspectives. And we also want to focus on how each of us at an individual and grassroots level, at community level and a policy level can take action to address energy poverty and bring about an inclusive and just transition. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Suzanne Rogers. Suzanne is a research and policy analyst with Social Justice Ireland. Suzanne will be discussing the impact of energy poverty in an Irish context today and how this must be addressed using the principles of a just transition.
Thank you. I'll share the screen and hopefully this will work. We good? Yeah, perfect. I just want to suppose caveat it with a few bits and pieces, which is that I know you've set out a definition there of energy poverty. In Europe, there's no actual common definition of what energy poverty is. Some will say that it's an inability to keep a house warm, which is very similar to what you've got there. And others would say that if you're spending more than 10% of household income on energy costs, that's a household and fuel poverty. Now, obviously, if you're a high income earner and you want to leave the lights on, spending 20% of your income on your fuel costs may not put you into energy poverty. So it's a slightly different conversation. But in terms of, I suppose, people getting into trouble with their bills, that is across the socioeconomic spectrum. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind about that. And at the moment, there's a moratorium on disconnections that was linked with the pandemic. The Commission, if I use acronyms, stop me. If I go with any initials that people don't understand, stop me. The CRU, or the Commissioner for Regulation of Utilities, are lifting the ban on the 1st of June. As of February, there were 240,006 households in electricity arrears and 112,883 households with gas arrears, totaling 90 million. So there's an awful lot of people who are going to be quite vulnerable when this ban is lifted. Now, I suppose, again, my presentation, the COVID doesn't enter into this at all because it just skews all of the stats. So if you're looking at it thinking, why are we going back to 2018, 2019, it's quite simply because this is an issue that existed pre-COVID, and to include maybe some COVID figures may not give an accurate picture of what we were experiencing in Ireland previously. So yeah, I suppose that's really the important thing, is that we're not going to take COVID into much account at all. I'll begin here, which is again the arrears on the utility bills, because for people in energy poverty, this is a major issue. So organisations like MABS and Vincent de Paul will describe clients of theirs talking about the stress of opening up utility bills, or a different type of stress, which is not opening them at all, knowing that they're just going to pile up. So that bill comes through, you either ignore it or you're very aware that you are going to be unable to pay. So you can see here, Ireland ranks second in terms of arrears on utility bills for that particular year. So households below 60% of median equivalised income had 23% of them were in arrears on utility bills. And again, you can see that households who were above a median equivalised income were still experiencing mortgage or utility arrears. What you'll find as well is that as a household, if you have to make the choice maybe between paying a credit union or a credit card or the mortgage or the utility bills or giving the young fella his bus fare for the week, you may put the utility bill to the side because you can put it off for a week or two. So that's where all those arrears will build up. So even the policies that have been aimed directly at alleviating energy poverty, particularly for low-income households, which is really the focus of the discussion this evening, it is an issue that still persists. A report by the Vincent de Paul stated that electricity and gas prices have increased by over 29% since 2010, when you include the public service obligation levy and standing charges and VAT. The uncontrollable related cost for the average electricity bill in an urban area accounts for 37%. So that's before you plug anything in or switch anything on, and that increases to 39% for rural areas. We do have a fuel allowance, which is payable to certain social welfare dependent households. It's not really sufficient to meet energy costs at these rates. As of January 2021, the fuel allowance would equate to €784 in total, based on SEAI, which is the, I've had to write a lot of these down myself because Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, that they would look at an indicative annual spend on fuel per BEO, which is the Building Energies Rating. It's about enough to cover a 2-bedroom apartment that would have an energy rating of B2 or better. So the less energy efficient the household is, the higher the bill is. A 2-bedroom apartment with an FRG rating would have a rough annual cost of somewhere in between €2,500 and €3,000 to keep the lights on and keep warm every year. That's almost 3 to 4 times the fuel allowance. And then as the house increases in size, so does the heating cost. So a 3-bed semi-D with a low energy efficiency rating could cost between €3,500 and €4,000 to heat. So another issue, I suppose, as well with some of the supplements that are available, and there is more than fuel allowance, but they generally tend to be paid in cash. And if you're a low income household, there's a lot of other demands on your income. So sometimes the bill can be the thing that you're going to scrimp and put to one side. So we'll look then at energy efficiency. So this is the BEO, or the Building Energy Rating. Now, it's an indication of the energy efficiency of a building in units of kilowatts per square metre per year. I'm not going to pretend to really know how that's worked out. But obviously you can see that A is the most efficient and G is the least efficient. And then the certificate would indicate the annual primary energy usage and carbon dioxide emissions associated with the provision of space heating, water heating, ventilation, lighting, pumps and fans. So the energy use is calculated on the basis of a notional family with a standard pattern of occupancy. And again, COVID skewed all that because we were all home all the time, every single day. So, you know, costs have changed a lot over the last year. It's compulsory for all dwellings that apply for planning permission since the 1st of Jan 2007 to have a BEO certificate. And again, any homes for sale or rent have to have a BEO certificate. So you can see here that this is the BEO certificates weighted to the national level as part of a CSO, Domestic Building Energies Rating. And according to their figures, there's about 230 homes across Ireland with a BEO of F or G, which is about 15% of all homes. So it's a sizable amount. Okay, so we'll look then at heating fuel. So if we look at the different types of heating fuel used, we can see that a higher proportion of homes with the lowest energy ratings use things like coal, smokeless fuel, peat, wood and solid multi-fuels. These are high emitters of greenhouse gases and they have a serious effect on air quality. According to the latest SEAI Energy in Ireland report, CO2 emissions from the combustion of fossil fuels accounted for 57% of Ireland's total greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a considerable figure. So we need to do something about it. What do? We make our homes more energy efficient. Energy efficient homes help reduce our carbon footprint as they require less fuel to heat. And obviously they would bring down bills. But despite 2 government strategies specifically aimed at tackling energy poverty, barriers persist to accessing grants for low-income households. And these are the households, as we can see, who are most likely to use solid fuels such as coal and peat, and the people who are more likely to be in the higher BER ratings. These are the households, though, that the policy should be targeting, but it's the upfront costs that are associated with accessing sustainable energy grants can act as a barrier for those on low income. But as we saw, with over 230,000 houses having F and G ratings, it's imperative that the government support these households by redesigning these schemes to make them more accessible. So one of the most cost-effective measures to promote sustainable development is to increase building energy efficiency. By doing that through retrofitting, along with actually reducing food waste, is one of the two most effective means to increase sustainability and meet our international environmental standards. The SEAI are currently supporting a deep retrofitting pilot, but they estimate that 35 million would be needed over the coming 35 years, billion, to make Ireland's existing housing stock low carbon by 2050. It's to be welcomed, as is the progress made in increasing energy efficiency in modern construction. So we can see that as buildings, as we move, say, the construction date of buildings will have a huge impact on how energy efficient that they are. So you can see here again, it's the more energy efficient, the more recent the build, the more energy efficient it is. Now again, I don't know where people are sort of based. My own experiences are of housing in either Dublin City or the suburbs, and also the congested district boards houses along the west coast, and they're all older buildings, and you went to bed cold and you woke up cold. So you can see how you know, a lot of, say, council estates in Dublin would have been built in the 50s, and you can see how there's no central heating in them, all that kind of stuff, that all has an impact on it. So again, we can see the link between the difference that the BER makes. I don't know if people can see that, but say in the top corner here, a 2-bedroom apartment with an A1 rating, we're looking at 140 so the cost down to the corner here, which is a large house, a G rating, you're looking at almost 12,000. So that's a huge, huge, huge difference. So I think that the key thing really is where to make the change. Is that personal payments or systemic shift? Who pays? Ultimately, we all do. Who benefits? Ultimately, we all do, but that can be a hard argument to make. I was at a roundtable discussion recently where they were looking at energy efficiency in the private rented sector. And that's the key difficulty, is it's the landlord would be expected to outlay tens of thousands of euro to retrofit their houses to make them more energy efficient. They don't see the return on that. It would be the tenant who would see the return on that in terms of lower energy costs and better health. So it's trying to sort of balance those two things. Now, I know ultimately, as people sharing a planet together, we do need to think bigger rather than, well, I have 2 investment properties, why would I be bothered spending 20 grand updating them when I won't see a return on that until I sell them in 20 years' time? We do really need to shift, I think, how we think about these things. So in terms then of, I suppose, a just transition, I'm not going to read out from the screen because I hate presentations where people read out from the screen. I think I could have done that at home myself. But a continued focus on cost neutral or cost effective actions to mitigate the impacts of climate action in the Climate Action Plan is misguided, while addressing the impact of climate change and implementing adaptation policies. It comes at a cost, and it does require strong collective effort. The cost of inaction and the associated social fallout would be much higher. So that's from the European Commission, that's how they would view it. So significant investment is required to ensure that our society meets our climate targets and that the transition is done in a just fashion. Focus must be on long-term value and a return that will be derived from this investment. Ireland has significant work to do in this area and is consistently one of the poorest performers in the EU when it comes to meeting emissions targets. Investment in renewable energy and retrofitting on the scale required to meet our national climate ambition requires large-scale investment in our infrastructure. For instance, an upgrade of the national grid must be a key element of that infrastructure investment, so that communities, cooperatives, farms and individuals can produce renewable energy and sell what they don't use back to the national grid. thus becoming self-sustaining and contributing to our national targets. I had an interesting conversation with the CEO of Bohemians Football Club. They're a Dublin 7 based football club, and they've just appointed a climate justice officer, which is a really fascinating concept. But they were looking at generating energy as part of their football club, as part of their rebuild, and maybe pumping that back through into the local community. Dublin 7 would be a very mixed community. There's plenty of people standing up in the door given this that live there, and there's a lot of sort of very, very old houses, but a really interesting way of looking at generating electricity as a football club and feeding that back into their community. So there's lots of different ways that we can approach this. Investment in renewable energy and retrofitting. So the issues around renewable energy subsidies and energy poverty must be addressed. So too often subsidies are only taken up by those who can afford to make the necessary investment. So if you're already a high income household, you can probably shell out for the retrofitting to be done. And because I know a lot of them you've got to put up maybe a couple of grand up front before you can get your grant back. That's not an option available to a lot of people. But again, those who most need them can't avail of them due to those costs. So these subsidies are really currently functioning as wealth transfers to those households on higher incomes, because they are where the costs, for example, say carbon taxes, are regressively socialised amongst all users. So incentives and tax structure must look at both short and long-term costs of different population segments, and eliminating energy poverty and protecting people from energy poverty should be a key pillar of any just transition platform. A state-led retrofitting scheme is required, especially to ensure social housing and anybody in poor quality housing has access. Again, research by the ERSI has shown that an increase in the carbon tax as it's currently designed would hit low-income households harder, unless there's a greater investment in income support, public transport and energy efficiency schemes. Low-income households will have to absorb these costs as they're unable to afford to switch to climate-friendly alternatives. It's probably like food, I can buy a cucumber or I can buy an organic cucumber, and the difference in price for living a healthier life, it's usually more expensive. So again, we need to include all our partners in the discussion. I'm going to maybe scoot through a bit of this. So again, a stakeholder engagement then for just transition. At a national level then, the Citizens' Assembly, when considering how the state can make Ireland a leader in tackling climate change, made a series of recommendations on tackling climate change and proposed some innovative solutions for addressing emissions from the agriculture, energy and transport sectors. So we would support the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly, which is an example of a positive stakeholder engagement and involvement in addressing a major public policy challenge. So in order to develop a sustainable society, services and infrastructure must be well planned and capable of adapting to the changing needs of the population over time. The Dublin of 2021 is a very different Dublin from 1971, and it would be a very different Dublin in 1921, and that's only the space of 100 years, that's all. So it needs to be adaptable. So policy planning and design should from the very beginning include potential future changes, and as far as possible should be designed with these in mind. We can see our demographic is changing, we can see population hubs are changing, the type of work we do is changing. We can see all of that. It should be possible to pre-plan as much as possible. Obviously, something like a pandemic has shown us that plans are great and all that, but you can't foresee everything, but that it should be some sort of way of getting involved in that. So I think I may have possibly gone over my time, but that's it really. It's a robust social dialogue that we would call for, that would provide a structure where current and future challenges can be addressed in a positive manner, in acknowledging the task ahead. This is not going to be easy. It's going to require individual change, community change, regional change, national change, international change. But I think sitting back and waiting for one of those things to go first, I think might be, we are running out of time. We do need to sort of move forward, I suppose, as quickly as possible. So I will stop talking. That's the last one there. Again, I have these if anybody wants them. I'm happy to send on any links or any reports that I've referred to. And if anybody is interested, the Law Society are having an environmental law and climate change online course. It's a 5-week online course. Now, it started this week, but I'm sure you may still be able to sign up for it. So it's a free 5-week online course, and there's lots of really, really good speakers there, I think, for people to be interested in the policies behind it as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. There seems to be some really good questions in the Q&A. So I might just start. How would the proposed carbon tax influence these figures? And do Social Justice Ireland support a carbon tax? What type of carbon tax would be accessible for Social Justice Ireland? I think we can all agree that's a really difficult one. Sorry to throw you into the deep end.
I suppose in a very short yes, but it has to be done right. And again, it's the most vulnerable that will be affected. Like I was reading this today just about kind of, carbon checks. Is that a possibility that has been discussed here by I think the then Taoiseach in 2019? We need to be moving away from our carbon usage. We do need to be incentivizing our over reliance on carbon, and there's carrot and stick, that sort of a way. So I mean, carbon taxes, yes, but I think done correctly and targeting in the right spots, that you're aware of that sort of just transition. It can't be, we can't return to austerity. That's another thing, that we really need to be careful about. But in a short answer, yes.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm just keeping an eye on time, so I might move on, and hopefully, Suzanne, maybe if you want to have a think of some of those answers and send them into the chat, or we probably will have time. Hopefully, we'll be able to come back on them and discuss them in a bit more depth after each of the speakers have presented. So I now want to introduce our second speaker, Maruška Mileta, who is the Head of Communications and Climate Change Program Assistant with Friends of the Earth Croatia, or Zelanaxia. My evident fluent Croatian is very much coming out there. So Maruška will be speaking about Friends of the Earth Croatia's campaign to support people experiencing energy poverty and the actions that can be taken from a grassroots approach. And she'll also discuss the importance of embedding social justice in climate action. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, Maruška.
Thank you, and your Croatian is quite well. Hello everyone. As you already heard, I'm based in Croatia, Zagreb, and I've been working with Friends of the Earth Croatia for 7 years now, and volunteered before that, so a long time. So I've been there for like 10 years, and mostly I've been focusing on energy issues in the past years, especially gas. But also most recently, and it's quite a new topic to us, it's energy poverty. So just to give, for the beginning, a bigger picture on the topic. So Zelanaxia, Friends of the Earth Croatia, we are an environmental justice organization, and social justice principles are at the core of our work. And as I said, energy poverty is a relatively new topic for us, but I feel it's become very evident that it is unavoidable to work on it if we want to truly advocate for climate justice on a local level. And social and human rights, especially in the light of the climate crisis, are inseparable from the right to a healthy environment. And when we are talking about low carbon development and just transition to a post-fossil fuel society, we do need to talk about the impact on the most vulnerable people and communities who are impacted by climate change, energy poverty, pollution, and so on. So it is crucial how we build a livable future for everyone, and that no one is left behind. And that includes communities who are most impacted by climate change, workers, marginalized communities, people of color, refugees, migrants, and so on. And just to mention one really good example from Croatia, where these links between social and climate justice and including human rights have been backed by the Croatian ombudsperson. So she published a new special report just this week on climate change in Croatia. And among other things, she reported on concrete environmental and human rights violations related to the environment in Croatia in the past 7 years, and issued recommendations on different issues, including energy poverty. And this has been submitted to the parliament and to the government. So this is a very positive development, and especially that these kind of institutions who are crucial for the functioning of the society are actually finally, at least in Croatia, for us, it's maybe we are a bit behind the rest of Western Europe, but for us it's very important that these links are actually made on this kind of level and quite progressively, I would say. So yeah, now talking about Croatia, we do have a significant number of energy poor households, and like other countries, and we've heard there is no clear actually definition of energy poverty in Europe. In Croatia, we don't really have good or any kind of actually measures to track the number of energy poor households or efficient measures to combat the problem. And this is especially true when we're talking about energy efficiency, where Croatia was even warned several times by the European Commission because of inadequate measures and reporting, and there was even an infringement procedure last year. So in this kind of context, where there is no real actually support from the state and basically the system, people here are used to self-organize and to help their communities. And for the past few years, an initiative, a now registered NGO called People for People, has been doing on the ground direct work with the poorest communities in central Croatia, basically humanitarian work. And with their help, we have identified households in this area who haven't had electricity for a number of years and even decades. And we started to plan a campaign in 2019 on the occasion of our organization's 30th anniversary, which was last year. And we basically wanted to run a campaign which would have a concrete positive impact on the local community, while also raising awareness on energy poverty and advocating for real solutions like locally sourced energy, solar energy. And the planning of this campaign, and we called it Ray of Sun, Light of Hope, which was a very interesting brainstorm to come up with that name. The preparation actually took a whole year before the campaign was launched in February last year. And in the first picture, you could see the logo actually of the campaign. We decided to try out a crowdfunding campaign for the first time ever. And we set our goal at raising from the public 13,500 euro for 5 households in the central Croatia area, as I mentioned, to bring them electricity with solar panels. And I have to say that the crowdfunding was not only successful, but we managed to exceed our goal, and we were able to cover 6 households in the end, while also one company that specializes in solar energy donated the 7th solar system. We had a huge media attention, and we managed to raise the funds with almost 500 individual donations. So we were very proud that we actually, the whole action campaign was backed by small donations, and that people recognize this as something very important. just some maybe interesting things from the strategy of the campaign. We planned out, as I said, everything in advance, as well as communication. And we compiled short video statements of support from celebrities, artists, NGOs, etc. And we also did short video interviews with actually the people we were helping with the campaign, supporting them, in which they're told their stories. And I have to say, of course, we didn't push anyone to do it, only those who wanted to share their story. And I think some of those elements made it a success, because the public knew whom the donations went to. So it was important to actually put a face to the campaign and tell the story of the people, how they're living, basically. And of course, we used some fun elements like memes, and as you can see in the picture, we had perks like beer to attract people, and just different strategies. So I guess in short, well-planned communication strategy, both on social media and traditional media, is very crucial, because crowdfunding campaigns are a slippery slope. And this also includes teasers before the launch of the campaign, as well as to make sure that you have a decent number of people ready to donate already on the first 2 days of the crowdfunding when it starts, so that it's not a failure. And I think one important lesson learned is definitely that you need to balance the campaigning narrative with the sensitivity of the situation. Meaning that a lot of people in extreme energy and general poverty live in very bad conditions, and oftentimes they're ashamed of how they live, and they don't want to be exposed. And I think this is especially important for us, those of us who are campaigners, to keep in mind when we're talking about also including impacted people in our campaigns and giving them spotlight, etc., and that we don't, basically use them just to raise the profile of the campaign and issue. And I think also another thing is that many people who are experiencing this situation and living in energy poverty, they don't really use the language as we do. Energy poverty to describe their situation. It's more something we use when we talk to decision makers and the media to raise awareness. So this also, like during the crowdfunding campaign, we try to balance the language as well. And another point I wanted to mention is, we definitely try to balance also the messages in the campaign, in terms to give hope to people, to give more focus on the solutions, the solar energy, rather than talking only about the problems. So, for example, our main promotional video, which I will share the link later, there it has English subtitles. We clearly there stated what is the main problem, and we offered a positive vision for the future and how we want to help those five households who were still living without electricity basically in the 21st century. And actually, I have to say, people were very appalled on the fact, and many people were not aware that actually there is people still living without electricity today. And for the end, just to mention, and you could see in the pictures, we installed all the solar systems by ourselves. So our volunteers and our colleague who is expert. Last summer, it was a bit postponed due to the pandemic, of course, and the lockdown, but we managed to do it in the end. But unfortunately, and I guess this is the kind of a bit sadder story, is that, as you may be aware, we had a huge earthquake, second one in central Croatia at the end of 2020, and it was exactly in this area where we installed the solar panels. And I think about half of the houses where we did install them were badly damaged and are not livable at the moment. So yeah, this was a very kind of hard hit for us as well. I mean, we're still now in the process to, you know, supporting them further and everything. But yeah, in conclusion, even with this situation, with the earthquake, I think it's still a very big success because we got a huge media attention. We really could talk about the topic. The campaign got into the yearly report from the ombudsperson in Croatia as a positive example of community support when the state fails, basically. So I think that's a big success, especially as, you know, as I said, we're very new in working on this topic, and it was just like we were, you know, what can we do for the 30th birthday of Zelena Akcija, and that we do something good while still, you know, maintaining our, you know, progressive vision and campaigning for, you know, kind of better society. So yeah. I think that's it. And I will put in a few links in the chat, just so you can get a picture of how it looked.
Thank you so much, Mariuszka. I have a question. I'm really interested in the whole campaign, and it seems that it was very much rooted in the community. And I would just love to know, you know, how as Zelena Akcija, how did you kind of initiate that process, and what do you think was the kind of the key factor to the success of the wide reach that the campaign achieved?
Well, I think it definitely helps that we are kind of the, I would say, most influential leading kind of green NGO in Croatia. So we do have the resources, I would say, and the drive, and also the access to people and media to do it. And we have a positive image in, I would say, in the general public, but also we have connections to, you know, we really, as I said, it took us 1 year to actually, we took time to prepare it very well and to reach out to people, to do research on how we will communicate in the campaign, and to, as I said, to reach out to kind of influential people in the society so they can also use their platforms to speak about the issue and to help us raise the funds. So I think this definitely helped. I think really crucial is the preparation, but also, you know, taking in account all the scenarios, what could happen along the way, basically. Yeah, and definitely to mention again the People for People initiative, who also are very, like in the local community, they're very much rooted. The woman that's leading the initiative is the deputy mayor of this one town there, where basically they're doing all the work, and she knows everyone. So I think without them, we could not do most of this, especially the beginning, where we reached out to the people who needed the electricity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Yeah, all of these topics I would love to. It's only kind of beginning to start a conversation, but just keeping an eye on time, I think it would be great, I guess, if we could move on and introduce our third speaker of this evening. So I'll introduce you to Michelle Kearns, who is the project policy worker with the National Traveller Money Advice and Budgeting Service. So Michelle will be discussing the impact of energy poverty on the traveller community in Ireland and the importance of including all voices in society to inform a holistic and just transition. Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us tonight.
Thanks, and it was very interesting to listen to the other speakers. I actually don't have a presentation tonight because I had previously given a very lengthy presentation on this, and I said this time I might just chat a little bit. So I might chat for about 10 minutes, and maybe we might have some discussion after that, and you're probably a bit over time, so it might be good that I'm just going to do the 10 minutes of the chat. So yeah, you've already said I work with National Traveller MABS, and they're the National Money Advice and Budgeting Service for travellers. We do mainly policy work. We don't do client work. So we work with other MAP services. There's 62 nationally, funded through the Citizens Information Board. And my job is really looking at policy, and in particular accommodation. And of course, energy poverty is linked to accommodation. So I suppose the background to our work is that we would do a lot of work on kind of financial inclusion issues, access to credit. But one of the key areas where some travellers need access to credit is in terms of purchasing their mobile home. So for those of you not familiar with traveller accommodation, travellers live in standard, some travellers live in standard accommodation, and some travellers live in traveller specific accommodation. And in that there are two types. There would be group housing schemes and halting sites. And on halting sites, local authorities will provide people with what's called a day unit, but families have to buy their own mobile home, they have to buy their own caravan, so they have to finance that. So there is a national scheme that provides finance for that, but through the local authorities. But in an awful lot of local authority areas, I think out of the 31 councils, there's only 11 still offering the loan. So many families in many areas don't have access to finance a mobile. And when they do, they often have to buy, because of the amount of money available, very poor quality mobiles. So for us, within the traveller community and the traveller population, like generally energy poverty is an issue, but for the 1,000 families who live in mobile homes, it's an acute issue. And back in 2018, we did a study into energy poverty amongst travellers living in mobile homes, and we found that about 77% of families were in energy poverty, and families on average spent about €108 a week on fuel, and that's compared with an average spend in the general population of around €40 per week. And so with the general population, people spend around 4% of their income, but for families living in mobile homes, that was 25% of their income. So we know the kind of indicator of energy poverty is around 10%. For those, those families, they were at 25% of their income. So, I mean, we made a kind of series of recommendations around access to additional fuel allowances, but also in terms of access to good quality mobile homes. And earlier spoke about standards in private, rented accommodation in terms of BER standards, and in local authority housing, talking about retrofitting those homes. But for families buying mobile homes, there is what we call a residential standard mobile that would be quite energy efficient on the market, but they're quite expensive. They start at about between 60 or 70,000 euros. So I suppose from our policy perspective, we were advocating that actually the state should buy those and they should rent them to families. But if you think about energy poverty for those families living on a halting site, the mobile is only one element of the situation that creates energy poverty. There are other elements. There are how the site itself is electrified and the energy supply to the site, but also the day units that's connected to the mobile, where people would have their kitchen and toilet facilities. So I suppose from our perspective, while we're advocating rental of mobile homes and access to energy efficient mobile homes, there are other things that we needed to look at to kind of create or reduce energy poverty and address it or eliminate it. So actually recently we've just linked up with SEAI Ireland and the Irish Traveller Movement and IT Sligo on a new pilot project that's going to look at the halting site and look at we might be able to take in terms of electrification of the site and in terms of retrofitting the day units. And I suppose for us from a policy perspective, it's to come up with the mechanism for a just transition. So like when Jessie asked me to speak tonight, I was asked to speak about a just transition. And for that group of families, we can advocate and say there needs to be a just transition for travellers, but how do you target the most vulnerable? And what do we have to do differently to enable people who don't have resources to choose greener energy per se? I would say, like, in terms of what we have to do differently, we have to include the people experience energy poverty in any actions that we're taking around moving towards a just transition. And then I suppose the state has to target its resources specifically at those with that are in the highest rates of energy poverty. So in terms of travellers, travellers living in mobile homes are one group, but across the board, travellers in general, would there be low levels of participation in the labour market and higher rates of poverty. I'm just going to check some of the other points I wanted to cover. Jessie asked when she asked me to speak tonight, she said, is there an argument for focusing in on energy poverty more specifically than poverty in general? And I would say that there is, that when we're moving towards a just transitions, there are many factors that we have to focus on, not just income, but resources for people. So, like, I suppose when, I have a presentation here, it's frozen. Can I just ask if there's anybody has any questions they'd like to ask? Sorry, so far, are there any in the chat?
Just go now. At the moment, more for Social Justice Ireland, but I guess what really kind of stands out to me, I suppose, so far is coming back to, I suppose, what Suzanne was saying, was that it's nearly these facilities are available with improved energy efficiency, but it's for the people who need it most that are, you know, the furthest from being able to access these facilities.
And Michelle, am I right in thinking as well that the allowance is allocated per bay? As in, like, if you've got 3 households maybe sharing a bay, that maybe only one household can claim. Isn't that would that be right? So even that's even, you know, another disadvantage, so that you might have 3 households sharing a space and yet only one household can claim for fuel allowance. So whilst there are supports available there, even that's not evenly distributed sometimes. Often when in situations on halting sites or in group housing schemes, when families are sharing, only one family is deemed as occupying the bay, so only one claimant can access the fuel allowance payment. I suppose in general, for me, when we were asked to speak tonight, it's about what are the mechanics of a just transition. You know, even in terms of nationally in recent budgets, there has been a lot of money actually towards retrofitting, which is really good, and some of that has been allocated for social housing. But within that, there was no specific allocation for traveller specific accommodation within that. And so if that group of people are the most energy poor, how do we do that further calculation of what is the best way of targeting that to the people that are in the highest levels? Because often that group of people are least likely to have any kind of resources. And even just around choice, Jessie was asking me, you know, in terms of choosing greener energy, like if you're someone living in a mobile home, like when we did our study, people were using all sorts of energy. They were using oil, they were using gas, they were using electricity, coal, briquettes, sticks. People will use anything when they're in something that's so poorly insulated, and that's why people spend so much money on fuel, because if the insulation in the unit that you're living in is so poor, you have no choice but to use, you know, carbon and fossil fuels. So it isn't a choice for the poorest. I suppose that's the argument that we'd be making. And I mean, I know the carbon taxes on fuels at the beginning of this month is going to have a really big impact on those groups, because, you know, you raise awareness with individuals about making choice about, you know, to live greener.
But when you're in poverty, you don't have that choice, because the systems that define where you live and how energy is provided to you, you know, your access to resources to have somewhere warm to live, you don't control any of that. It's everything is outside of your control. So I suppose the point earlier that I was trying to make is the state needs to play a central role in saying there's a group of people in our society that we don't have to convince, we have to provide for. We have to provide for the people who are the most at risk, and we have to work with them to figure out what the best way of doing that is. And I suppose that pilot that I spoke about earlier on, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take a halting site, look at all the elements that contribute to the dire circumstances actually people are living in. Like Jessie had said to me when she asked me to come and speak tonight, like, what are the impacts on people? And I was at a meeting today where we were talking about people living on halting sites during the night, having to leave their day unit to go to a tin can where there's a toilet and a shower with a disabled child, going from a very cold space to an absolutely freezing cold space with a young vulnerable child in the middle of the night. And for me, we can't expect that group of people to choose greener energy or to make choices. You know, the state just needs to respond to that. They need to find out what the problem is and what's the quickest way of solving it. And you can't do that unless you work with the people. One of the things we're going to look at in this pilot is how we electrify the site, you know, halting site. So we'd pick an area and work in one area, but could we use solar panels to generate energy on the site? Could we use battery powered devices that we could put onto mobile homes? Or because travellers are nomadic people and they live differently than us, the state has to refocus how it thinks about its responses to those particular problems, because often our systems are set up for settled sedentary way of living, and so for that group of people we have to really think differently. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks so much. There are a few questions in the Q&A. Would you like to keep presenting, or would you prefer to kind of open up a discussion?
No, I'm finished. Like, yeah, like I actually think sometimes it's the discussion that's most useful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. We've a question from Ronan, and he said, Michelle, is there any way to retrofit or improve existing? Sorry, that's just disappeared. Is there a way to retrofit or improve existing mobile homes? And thanks so much for the presentation. It's brilliant.
Yeah, no, sorry, I actually crashed and burned in the middle of it because my iPad froze. But well, actually, we did look at that, and we're linking up with Sligo IT at the moment, and there's a guy down there who works in energy technologies, and he had approached us about looking at that, about retrofitting and then devices for powering the mobiles. But can I be honest with you, when we did our study, if you think people have no access to credit to buy decent homes, what you would be retrofitting is really old, is really badly insulated, is, you know, the stories we hear about rats eating out underneath mobile homes and holes in the bottoms of, you know, or in the windows, you know, being single glazed. You know, you could do some kind of an analysis of what's there, but we know people haven't had the money to buy good quality homes in the first instance. So I just think people should be, the state should be saying what's the best way of just providing new homes, you know. And like, we're actually looking with Sligo IT about doing a piece about looking what's on the market in terms of both the retail and the wholesale market, you know, in the, not only in the UK but on the continent, in terms of what could we get this, ask the state to buy in terms of what's energy efficient. In the UK there is this British standard that denotes residential standard mobiles, so they're mobiles that are built to be lived in all year round. But most travellers don't live in those because they're so expensive to buy in the first instance. So what we would be saying is, it doesn't make any financial sense. Like at the moment, actually, I didn't mention this, there is a pilot preferential caravan loan scheme. So there's a new iteration of the old pilot scheme, or actually the original was a pilot, it was still called a pilot from 2000, where the councils will be lending people money to buy their mobile, and the budget is increased to 30,000. But the purchasing power of that loan scheme is not going to buy residential standard homes, and that's our key problem with it. Now, while we build, you know, in MABs we'll be supporting people to access this, we won't diverge from our own policy position is that people need residential standard. People don't have the money to buy those, so rental needs to be an option.
Okay, yeah.
To answer, we don't think it's worth retrofitting what's there out. They're just too poor. The quality is just too poor in the first instance.
Yeah, sure. No, that makes complete sense. I would, I suppose just with 10 minutes left, it would be great to open out, I suppose, a discussion for all the panelists. So there's just a question from Aideen. She says, what would be your top 3 policies or legislative suggestions to support people living in energy poverty? Suzanne, I might go with you first.
I think it has to be the energy efficient homes, because that's both reducing individual costs and impacting on the environment. So I think subsidies, you know, increasing fuel allowance or increasing financial supports, it doesn't really get to the nub of it, you know, that sort of a way. And I suppose energy costs are increasing all of the time. So I think it has to be about reducing our energy costs and reducing our carbon output at the same time. So I would have thought that really has to be where the money needs to be spent. Now, I know I didn't answer 1 or 2 of the questions there, but I put a link in, I think, for one, but I know one of the questions was how to incentivise or force landlords to bring the BER ratings in. I mean, that was the focus of that conversation, because how do you? So there was people there from, I suppose, landlord organisations, because they're the people you need to have in the room. It's all very well us sitting around going, yeah, you know, it's a great thing to do, you know, it has to be done, but you need to convince the people who are going to do it. So they were talking about maybe tax breaks and incentives and stuff like that. And what is depressing is because local authorities are at the moment tasked with, I suppose, ensuring the standards of private rented accommodation. And not only do they only get to assess about 10% of rented properties, 93% of what they actually survey are not up to scratch. So there might be an argument to be made for, if you are renting in the private rented sector, that you have to have some sort of certificate that says, you know, because you have your BER, and that's fine, but to be able to say, for me to be able to rent out a home, it has to reach certain standards, so that there would be possibly maybe a conversation about saying, right, when I go onto daft.ie, that every landlord is compliant with a basic minimum standard. I mean, in certain parts of Dublin, you go by, and what was I reading the other day? There's like 140 people in a house somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, if you look at those kind of big 3-4 story things down around Summerhill and down around Croke Park or the North Circular Road, like, you know, there's no standards there at all. But for me, anyway, the short answer is retrofitting. I think making homes energy efficient, I think, meets your individual household financial issues and the longer term climate environmental issues as well.
Perfect, thanks so much. Mariuszka, from your perspective in Friends of the Earth Croatia, what are your top 3 policies or legislative suggestions to support people living in energy poverty?
Okay, it's a bit, I would say, complex. I think it really depends on the context. I definitely agree. One is the renovations, especially in residential buildings, because we know in public buildings it's being done, but the issues with residential buildings. But another aspect is also, especially like I think Southeastern Europe, it's rural areas where actually the energy poverty is highest. And there is not only just problem, like I mentioned before, access to basic energy needs like electricity that's lacking, but there's also issues with access to utilities like clean water, sanitation, roads in those areas. So that's very much, I would say, connected. And it was actually one of our, so after the earthquake, as I mentioned, we joined up with about 100 different organizations, scientific institutions, small companies in Croatia to issue a set of a letter with demands to the government for like wholesome renovation, a recovery from the earthquake, which would include all these things I mentioned, not just the renovation of buildings in a kind of green way and in line with energy efficiency measures, but also to really make people's lives better in the context of access to basic utilities, roads, and so on. So I think we need to also think about the different contexts in different areas, because I feel that rural parts and urban parts are a bit different when it comes to fighting energy poverty.
Okay, perfect. And Michelle, I'll pass that question on to you as well. Your top 3 policy or legislative suggestions to support people living in energy poverty.
Like I know that, sorry, yeah, I know for us, retrofitting is important in terms of social housing and traveller accommodation, but also access to affordable, clean energy. So how we can use green technologies that provide cheap energy. I think there needs to be an emphasis on that. Yeah, I mean, energy poverty is a factor of income. So, I mean, there's a big thing in the room about, you know, in terms of acknowledging this affects, you know, poor people. So there's whole issues around income adequacy. Travellers, 84% are unemployed. So income is always going to be a factor with energy poverty. So it's to look at the 3 elements that contribute that in the price of energy, the accommodation that you live in, and your income. So I think energy poverty is situated in that wider context of poverty. But yeah, in terms of policy priorities, I would agree with the other 2 speakers around retrofitting and for us access to clean or cheaper energy. It's how you do that and how you prioritise the poorest and the most energy poor. I suppose that's what we're interested in terms of the mechanics of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then there's just, I suppose, probably time for one more question. I might ask Michelle, what is Traveller Mab's opinion of the climate action bill?
Can I say I don't have I can't talk about that because we haven't discussed that back in the office. We don't have an actual policy position on it. But what I would say is we need to be prioritising the most vulnerable in society, and any actions that we take or any actions that government takes should prioritise the most energy poor. Thanks.
And I just had, there are, I'm getting messages from Not Here, Not Anywhere group members like, make sure you ask this one. So I'm just making sure I have the right one. So yes, I have it. So a question for Suzanne about investments. So are there any estimations of how much a just transition would cost? And if it's possible to fund that within the EU's borrowing and deficit rules, can we do it in a just way without changing those rules for good?
I saw that question, and I suppose for us, just transition is about more than climate and energy, you know, that kind of thing. It's across the board. It's jobs, it's education, it's skills training. So that's a bit like it's too big of a question, you know, that sort of thing. A just transition is everything. So I mean, I did put a link to I mean our analysis last year of budget 2021 in terms of carbon tax and just transition. I did put a link into the chat to reply to a different question to that person. So there might be something in there, but it's just it's too big of a question, you know, that sort of thing. But there is, if you go onto our website, even if you just put in just transition in the search or carbon tax in the search, it'll pop up. There's loads and loads and loads there, but I just think just transition is too big of a, I think, how much will it cost to change the world? That's what that question is to me, and it's a lot, but it needs to be spent. We don't really have a choice. So regardless of your stance on anti-science or anti-climate change or whatever it is, the fact is, if we're reliant on fossil fuels, they are a finite resource. We do need to look at different ways of feeding ourselves, different ways of fueling ourselves, different ways of living and being. So that's what that question is to me. It's too big. But I said, if you go onto our website, it'll be, I mean, I could talk for another hour, like there's no problem with that. But if you go onto our website, there'll be a bit more coherent policy stuff on it, and especially in terms of last year's budget and our responses to that, it'll all be there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think, yeah, that's really coming to the fore, is that an hour and 15 minutes is really just kind of tip of the iceberg stuff in terms of actually understanding and discussing energy poverty and how that ties in with a kind of a just transition at a community level, but also at a kind of a more international level. So Maeve, who's in Not Here, Not Anywhere, is she had prepared a few links with more information in case anyone is interested in exploring this topic in more detail. If they should be available in the chat, and we'll be also sending those out via email, I suppose, with the slides and more information about the topic. Just to wrap up, I'm aware we're slightly over time, but just a few kind of little housekeeping bits. If you'd like to keep up to date with Not Here, Not Anywhere, our campaigns, our future webinars, things like that, Maeve will also send links to our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts in the chat. And finally, we'd love to hear your feedback about this webinar. So we have a brief 2-minute survey, which Britta will share now, and we'd really appreciate if you could take the time to fill it out. And it's through your feedback, I suppose, that we can keep improving our webinars. So I might, just waiting to see if we have links to the social media accounts. If not, yeah, that email will be circulating with all the resources and more information on energy poverty and a just transition. So without further ado, I'd just like to say thank you so much to all our panelists for your time, your presentations, to Not Here, Not Anywhere members, Britta and Brian, for all their help from tech support, to Maeve and Jessie for all their help to actually organise and put together this webinar. And most of all, to all of you who have attended tonight and for giving your time to join us. Thank you so much and have a lovely evening. That is the end of our webinar tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.